Two words. Elijah Crawford. Yet again, BYU knocks it out of the park, landing another high-level athlete to add to Kevin Young's already impressive roster. What does it mean for BYU? Let's talk about it.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, your resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you who we like to call everydayers right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. The motto is your team every day, and we are your original daily podcast focused on all things BYU. Let's dive right in and waste no time. The good news for the BYU men's basketball program rolled on Tuesday afternoon as Elijah Crawford made it officially official as he is signed with the BYU men's basketball program. Another four-star talent joining Kevin Young's already very talented and robust roster. And Crawford, he had another top 100 recruit. He joins his fellow signee and Brody Kozlowski as ESPN Top 100 recruits. And this is just another feather in the cap of Kevin Young, everybody. The one thing about Elijah Crawford, and I talked about it recently on the podcast, is this is a kid who's absolutely fearless with the ball in his hands. He is a bona fide three-level scorer. And those of you who may be wondering what a three-level scorer means, it means he has as adept ability to shoot the three as he does shooting in the mid-range and going to the rim and scoring on a layup. He's a 6'1", just dynamite type player, and I cannot believe the BYU is doing what they're doing right now in basketball. It's a fever dream. It really is. But the good news is it just continues to come in major doses for the BYU basketball program. The hire of Kevin Young, as every day passes and more good news rolls in for the BYU basketball program, it looks like just an absolutely genius move for BYU. Tom Homo, who else was involved in that hire? I'm sure that you also had to go through the board of trustees at the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. You have President C. Shane Reese as president of the university. You also have Brian Santiago involved. Every one of those individuals should be essentially patting themselves on the back for the hire they made and bringing Kevin Young in to replace Mark Pope. Mark Pope did some very, very good things at BYU, but Kevin Young has kind of taken that baton from him and is just like taken off like a rocket. And it's just an incredible thing to watch what BYU's doing right now. But I don't want to take it away. We're going to keep the focus on Elijah Crawford here because this is a young man who I think is going to come to BYU and absolutely blow up. And he's going to do it as soon as this fall as a true freshman. Most of you will recall that he originally signed with Stanford, was a guy that Stanford was very excited to have as a member of their basketball program, but then they jettisoned their coaching staff with Jared Haas being fired, and that allowed BYU to land at Brandon Dunson, who was an assistant at Stanford, and the relationship between Dunson and Crawford cannot be overstated in this, everybody. There were a number of high-level programs that wanted to get Elijah Crawford, and he spurned all of them because of the relationship mainly that he had with Brandon Dunson. Trusted that Dunson when he told him about BYU and what it could offer to Crawford, and he has decided that BYU is where he wants to be. I think this is just an absolute slam dunk of a signing for BYU. Immediately, he upgrades the roster for the Cougars. He gives Dallin Hall the backup point guard that BYU's been looking for, and with his scoring prowess at a minimum, Crawford probably could be your sixth man next year. We all are kind of awaiting what the final word is going to be on Jackson Robinson's future, but everything indicates that if he does return to the college level, it's probably going to be elsewhere outside of BYU, and I've been on that train since January. To those of you who have been longtime listeners, I've been saying, do not anticipate Jackson Robinson back at BYU next season, so that leaves a hole in that sixth man alignment. And right now, Crawford, his best skill is his ability to score with the ball in his hands. That screams to me to be the sixth man that BYU wants off the bench, at least in the interim. Can he come in and play off ball? Sure, he probably could do that, but at the same time, he's going to be able to come in and relieve Dallin Hall of that major load that Hall carried last year. Remember how many minutes Dallin was playing? He got worn down towards the end of the season. I don't think it's a coincidence that some of the faltering that BYU had late in the season, especially in that loss to Duquesne, it probably was some of those tired legs after playing a lot of minutes for a guy like Dallin Hall. So I really like what Elijah Crawford offers as a backup point guard, but more importantly right now, as a freshman, he's going to be an absolute scoring machine, it feels like, off the bench. He's a young man originally from Augusta, Georgia, transferred to Brewster Academy, which, as those of you who know what Brewster is, it's a prep academy that plays at the highest levels of high school basketball. Guys like Charles Abuo, former BYU standout, have played at Brewster Academy. Donovan Mitchell, for those of you who may be Utah Jazz fans, you remember Donovan, he played at Brewster for a year before he ended up going to Louisville for his college days. That is a program, speaking of Brewster, that just pumps out Division I talent, and Elijah Crawford is yet the latest to come out of that. And BYU's lucky to have him inside the BYU basketball program. I cannot wait to see what he offers to this BYU roster. I think he's going to come in and really change the look for the Cougars. I said it on another edition of the podcast, I think going back maybe just earlier this week, that a guy like Crawford offers the ability for BYU to have two ball handlers on the court with Dallin Hall and himself on the court if need be. The nice part about Kevin Young's background as an offensive innovator is he has been proven to be able to adapt to whatever he has on his roster. If he has two premier ball handlers, he'll put them on the court and run different sets to allow both of them to distribute. The other thing is if you need to, you also can play them in a platoon role where Dallin Hall maybe starts the game, but then you bring in Crawford to relieve him. And like I said, keep some of the minutes and some of the wear and tear off of Hall, but you don't drop any potential, I'm trying to say, you don't lose anything when Dallin Hall comes off the court, because we all recall last year when Dallin Hall was off the court, it was a really, really big struggle for BYU to get into their offensive sets. So this is a really solid pickup for BYU. Frankly, it's an awesome pickup. I don't want to downplay it at all, because BYU is getting another top 100 recruit to add to an already strong roster. And the good news is, if you want to look at it that way, is there are still 4 more roster slots for BYU to fill out their 13 scholarships. And what can Kevin Young do with those? Can he bring in some even more high-level talent? Can he go get Berke Buyuktuncel, I'm going to still butcher his name, the transfer from UCLA? Or is Maxim Logue, is he going to be a guy that BYU lands from the European ranks? The good news is Kevin Young seemingly has this Midas golden touch that everything that he goes about doing for the BYU basketball program comes to fruition, and it turns golden. So congratulations are in order to BYU basketball. Congratulations to Elijah Crawford in terms of him deciding very quickly that BYU is where he wanted to be. And also add this, there is a dead period coming up on the 22nd. So tomorrow, as a recording of this podcast, most of you might be watching this on the 22nd. But that deadline essentially opens up a quiet period where guys can't be visiting campuses. And if you wanted to make a visit to a program, you had to do it before that deadline was imposed. Well, there were a number of programs, according to what I was reading from Vanquish the Foe and Robbie McCombs, that wanted to get Elijah Crawford on a visit before that deadline hit. He decided to spurn them all and said, you know what? BYU is where I want to be. It says that sources said that Kansas and Florida wanted to get Elijah on visits and had offered him a scholarship, but he spurned them, declined, and only visited BYU and decided that BYU is where he wants to be. That is awesome to see. And it adds to an already strong run for the BYU basketball program. Remember, a lot of programs, when you lose a coach the caliber of Mark Pope, usually sets a program back for at least a recruiting cycle or two. But it feels like, once again, that Kevin Young just kind of picked up the baton and really is just propelled forward. It's like Mark Pope was running maybe an 11-second 100-meter dash, and Kevin Young is running like a sub-10-second 100 meters. And it's incredible to do what he is doing. And Elijah Crawford screams to what the cachet is on the recruiting trail for a guy like Kevin Young. He can point to what he's done in the NBA and point to the various superstars he's worked with. And I'm sure he's talked to guys like, in this case, Elijah Crawford, and said, hey, you know that guy Chris Paul? Yeah, I'm a big reason why he's had a lot of late success in his career. Remember, Chris Paul's getting near 40, but he continues to be a very successful NBA player. Well, there's a big reason why. Guys like Kevin Young have been able to help him keep at it at a high level. And that is something that I'm sure a smaller guard like Elijah Crawford, that's probably very attractive to hear that come out of Kevin Young's mouth. And obviously his relationship with Brandon Dunson was just, you can't overstate how big that was for BYU in landing Elijah Crawford's signature. All right, we will talk about the impact of BYU's roster right now. How does it look, and where does BYU need to go from here in terms of continuing to add to a roster that they hope will compete at the top, if not the top, of the Big 12 next fall? We'll dig into that next as we roll on right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at eBay Motors. Now, passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive, my friends. eBay Motors has got everything to maintain your vehicle and level it to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car their MVP and bring home huge wins, my friends. Keep your ride or die alive today at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. But once again, keep your ride or die alive once again today at ebaymotors.com. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. I want to remind you guys, are you sick of watching Fox Sports and ESPN and seeing all of the talking heads screaming at each other and having to turn down that volume because you can't deal with it? Well, I want you guys to make the switch to Locked On Sports Today as a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every single day to bring the biggest stories without all the screaming going on the other networks. Locked On Sports Today brings you the can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right. So as I mentioned, I alluded to it, BYU currently stands with 9 scholarship players on their roster. Now, obviously, they'll supplement that with some walk-ons once they fill out the other 4 spots, because you're allowed to have 13 scholarships on your basketball program, and BYU's got to fill out the rest of that roster. Now, let's also say one other thing. BYU only played with 12 scholarship players last year. So they were a man short last year, but they still have 4 spots to fill here. Now, as it stands, BYU's backcourt consists of Dallin Hall, Elijah Crawford, and Trey Stewart as your main ball handling guards. And you call it a point guard, whatever you want, but basketball has become more of essentially you have ball handlers, you have wing players, and then you have your front court players, the big men. On the wings, you have Richie Saunders, Trevin Nell, Dawson Baker, who could probably play the point guard or any one of the other guard positions as a ball handler if need be, but he's got size there. And then in your bigs, you got Fousseyni Traore, Brody Kozlowski, and Keba Keita. So I look at it right now, and the 9 guys BYU currently has, I'm actually okay. I'm very comfortable with, because I think Dallin Hall and Elijah Crawford, their ability to handle the ball and have Trey Stewart there as an insurance policy, that's great. Your point guard position, it's done. You don't have to worry about it, because even if a guy like Elijah Crawford or Trey Stewart falter at all, Dawson Baker can slide into that backup role and I think could handle the load there. On the wings, Richie Saunders, he is a sure bet in my mind to start next season. The question for me is it going to be Trevin Nell or Dawson Baker maybe starting alongside him, or does BYU go out and get some other combo guard / wing types that come in and have that ability to impact BYU? The biggest name on the board right now outside of Elijah Crawford for BYU is the name Chaz Lanier. Chaz is visiting Kentucky ahead of the deadline here. He recently visited BYU. There's indications he has plans to at least talk to, if not visit, Tennessee, where he is a native of the state of Tennessee. And it essentially has come down to he's going to pick between BYU, the Kentucky Wildcats, and Mark Pope, or the Tennessee Volunteers and Rick Barnes. BYU's in the mix for Lanier. And if you have watched what Lanier's doing, he did it at the G League showcase event at the NBA Combine last week. He is an incredible, prolific shooter. He's got the ability to hoist it up, and the mechanics are sound, and he's knocking it down at a very high level. He shot plus 40%, no, better than 40%, excuse me, last year at North Florida on really high usage. I think it was 7.5 3-point attempts per game. I was making better than, I think it was 41, 42. No, actually, no, it was 44% last year from 3. He is a bona fide shooter, a bona fide scorer, and if BYU can add Chaz Lanier, I think Richie Saunders and Chaz Lanier are your starting 2 and 3 men, your wing players, alongside Dallin Hall in that lineup. The other remaining hole in BYU's lineup is to find another big or 2 as well to fill out this roster. Does that mean that Maxim Logue could fill that role? Sure, he'd be another uber athletic big man, but he's a little more raw. Think of him as being an upgraded version of a Tiki Aliatiki. And Tiki was a guy who had an incredible freakish athleticism when he came out of the prep ranks in Canada and joined BYU, but just never really developed very much more than what he was when he arrived in Provo. And that's how it goes sometimes. Maxim Logue, what he's doing over in Europe, playing in his native France, he shows all of the athletic potential that Atiki Alitiki exhibited during his time at BYU, but I think a little more polished, and the capability as being a younger player at 18 years old that has still got a lot of potential and time on his hands to develop into more of a rounded basketball player. So right now, the roster for BYU with 9 guys is very solid. You add the guys that are potentially on the board still, like I said, in Chaz, Lanier. There's also the young man from Rutgers. His name is escaping me. I probably should. I didn't pull this up. That's another wing player. And then you also have Berke, Buyuktuncel, Buyuktuncel. I'm going to butcher that name for years if he does pick BYU. The transfer from UCLA, and then Maxim Logue. If you add those 4 players, that would I fill out the 13-man roster there. Is that what BYU is going to go for? Or are they going to be content maybe to add 1 or 2 of those guys? Because I said BYU with Elijah Crawford the other day essentially had 5 guys on the list of guys they're going after. And I thought if BYU landed 2 of the 5, essentially hit 40% on that, it'd be a very, very nice group of guys to land. We already 1 out of the 5 have landed at BYU and Elijah Crawford. Do you add Chaz Lanier, or do you add one of the other guys? And that would fulfill what I think would be a success for BYU on that front. You land 3 or more of those guys, then it's awesome. It continues to show that Kevin Young has major cachet in the recruiting game. The other question is how patient is BYU willing to be? Because I know that Kevin Young has hopes of going to the international market, bringing over maybe a EuroLeague player or 2, but those players don't typically come until later on in the summer. Think June, July. That's when they ultimately make their decision and sign with the program in college that they're going to play for. Will he hold a scholarship or 2 in reserve with the hopes of landing a player of that caliber and maybe pass on some of the short-term options out there, maybe for a longer-term play? Because there are a number of high-level guys in the EuroLeague that BYU is reportedly in the mix for, but you've got to just essentially play the waiting game with them. Are you willing to wait? I would imagine that the BYU is, if they legitimately believe they can land 1 or 2 of those guys and they're as high a caliber as some indicate they are. We're talking like bona fide NBA draft types, one and doneers, as it were. If you can get a guy of that caliber, yeah, you leave a scholarship open and wait until June or July, whenever they are good and ready to sign on the dotted line. But right now, the roster is very strong, albeit with just the 9 players, and there is a whole ton of potential out there for BYU to upgrade it even more. And if BYU continues to add the type of talent they have added so far in this recruiting cycle, there's no reason to think that BYU cannot at least match, if not exceed, that 5th place finish last year. Yes, we all know that the Big 12 is the best basketball conference in the country, but the Cougars showed that they can compete at that level. And the roster right now for BYU shows signs of being maybe even more talented and deeper than it was a year ago. So what could BYU accomplish if they have more talent and are able to continue to play that balanced minutes that they played, albeit allowing Dallin Hall to maybe not carry as heavy a load? That seems like the ceiling is the roof. Was that the phrase that Michael Jordan famously used once upon a time at North Carolina? And it just feels like there is a major opportunity for BYU basketball to have a lot of guys and a lot of potential going into year 2 in the Big 12. And there's a lot of juice around the BYU basketball program right now, and for good reason. They are absolutely killing it out there. So I got nothing but mad props and respect to be shown to Kevin Young, also to guys like Brandon Dunson and Chris Burgess, who make up the BYU coaching staff right now. Doug Stewart is their chief of staff. He's absolutely knocking out of the park as well. So props to what BYU is doing. And once again, I'll just go back to what I said earlier. They made a major, incredible hire in bringing Kevin Young in, and he continues just to impress in the early run as BYU basketball head coach. All right, there is good news and bad news on the more 30,000 foot front for BYU Athletics as members of the Big 12 Conference. What is that? Well, the NCAA has essentially locked down how they're going to go about paying off a settlement that's going to cost in the billions of dollars, multiple billions of dollars. How will that impact BYU? How will it more importantly impact BYU athletes going forward? We'll dig into that next as you round out this edition of Locked On Cougars. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you guys for being with us. All right, I want to remind you guys, if you've not done so already, please sign up for our Locked On Cougars Insider Group. It's a great way to get my updates live time coming to your phone in the form of a text message. You can join the Locked On Cougars Insider Group by clicking the link in the show notes below, whether you're watching and or listening to this. Join us over there. It's a 14-day free trial to see if it's the right option for you, and then just $4.99 a month after that. I've got a really fun crew that we've developed over there. I'd love for more of you to join us. Like, once again, it's passing along inside intel I'm hearing literally in the moment. And the good news is you don't have to go searching for it. It comes to your phone directly to it via text message. Think about how direct that is. It's nothing better than that. So join us today on the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. All right. So the Big 12, some news coming out that the Big 12 was the first conference to officially sign off on the House versus NCAA case, essentially the settlement that the NCAA is proposing to get this case off of their books. What does that mean for BYU? Well, Big 12 presidents and chancellors voted virtually Tuesday afternoon to unanimously approve, with the departing members, Texas and Oklahoma, abstaining. The 12 continuing members for this year's conference all voted to pass the measure. It is going to withhold up to $30 million annually from future payouts from the NCAA to Big 12 schools over the next 10 years to pay off what is expected to be a fund of $2.7 billion to pay former athletes who are not able to sign name, image, and likeness deals that were the crux of this case, House versus the NCAA. The reason why the NCAA is settling this case is because there are legal scholars out there who think that if the NCAA were to have gone to trial in this case, they likely lose the trial, and the damages that could have been forced upon them by the court that was going to be heard in could be north of $20 billion. You heard that right. More than tenfold, almost tenfold more than what they're going to settle for in this case. That is why the NCAA and their member conferences have come to this agreement to just pay out and settle this case out of court and get it done. Now, there's obviously some angst from the non-power conferences in terms of them having to foot 60% of the payout. The way it's going to go is $1.6 billion of it's going to be paid out by member schools across the 32 Division I conferences. Those include such conferences as the Big Sky. Tom Wistrcill, they are based in Ogden, speaking of the headquarters of the Big Sky Conference. They are not happy with the current proposal. Maybe not in Ogden, in Farmington. They're Northern Utah regardless, but they are not content with having to foot as big of a bill as they apparently are going to. 40% of the $1.6 billion is going to come from the power conferences, of which BYU is a member. Now, obviously, it's not fun for BYU to have joined the Big 12 and immediately be hit with this major payment that is going to have to come off their books annually. But we all know that BYU has always worked in the black. They've always run a surplus. They don't work in a deficit. They cannot do that. It's essentially a mandate from the university and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The BYU Athletics has to operate within its own means. They have to be able to, I use the term all the time, eat what they kill. Whatever revenue they generate, that's what they have to operate with. And they're making more money than ever here in the Big 12. Well, a large chunk of that could be chewed up over the next decade as members of the Big 12 conference. But it is what it is at this point. So you have to move forward here and make do. The good news is if you're a BYU athlete, part of this settlement is going to dictate that up to $20 million, so a decent amount of money, is going to be allocated annually for revenue sharing. The future of the NCAA is changing at just an incredible speed, and this is the biggest change to date. Revenue sharing is here. What does that mean for BYU athletics? Well, that means that BYU athletes are going to be able to get a cut of what the Big 12 TV contracts and other revenue that BYU generates come in annually. How much that will be, where that money is dispersed, is it going to be more allocated towards BYU football, BYU basketball? Will it be evenly distributed across all BYU sports? That remains to be determined. And the other part of it is that there is no mandate that you have to spend the full $20 million either. It's just going to be an opportunity to spend up to $20 million in permissive revenue sharing. That's expected to begin next fall in 2025. So BYU players hoping to get a payout this year, not going to work out that way, but those players are potentially subject to being part of this class action suit that could see them make some of the money off this $2.7 billion settlement. So It's both good and bad news because, like I said, BYU is going to be footing a pretty hefty bill to pay off a debt that they really didn't incur because they're a recent member of the Big 12 Conference. But as a member of the conference, you got to be able to do what the rest of the conference is going to do. But then also on the flip side, now you have the opportunity to share with your athletes. What is the impact on collectives moving forward as a result of this revenue sharing? That is a great question in and of itself. The thought is that with the NCAA making this move, is that the collectives will essentially fade away, at least in theory. Now, is that realistic? We'll see. But you look at it, say ESPN says this. Multiple sources have told ESPN that some school leaders are hopeful that the future revenue sharing model will eliminate or significantly decrease the role NIL collectives play in the marketplace for athletes, while an additional $20 million flowing directly from schools to athletes could theoretically satisfy the competitive market for talent and decrease the interest of other major donors from contributing to collectives. Experts say there's no clear legal mechanism that would be included in a settlement that would eliminate collectives altogether. So the Royal Blue and KooConnect could keep doing their thing and add to an already expansive pot of money coming from BYU directly to their student athletes. There's never been a better time to be a student athlete at the Division I level, and especially at BYU. You're going to be making more money than ever, and they're already making more than a lot of athletes in previous decades would have dreamed of having. Not too long ago, it was essentially scholarship, room and board, and maybe a little spending money was what you got. Now you're getting money for your school supplies. You're getting a cost of living stipend that is added upon already your room and board base level, along with your scholarship. You're getting NIL money. And as it stands right now, as long as all 32 conferences sign off on this settlement, well, there's going to be another $20 million at play for BYU athletes. And I don't envy BYU Athletics, led by Tom Homo, and trying to carve out another $20 million in their budget to distribute to athletes. But that's the future of the NCAA, and the Cougars got to get on board because everybody else is going to be playing ball, and they will have to do the exact same thing as we move forward into a new era of college athletics. All right. That's what I got for you guys. It was a really fun show. I wanted to get it out to you guys right away. Some big news, obviously, for BYU to land Elijah Crawford. So congratulations once again to him and the BYU basketball program. I also probably should mention this as well. Arkansas State transfer Kendra Gillespie signed with the BYU women's basketball team, formerly of Baylor, the Baylor Bears. She spent 1 year at Arkansas State before landing at BYU. So don't overlook what BYU women's basketball is doing as they add to their roster under Amber Whiting. So congratulations to Coach Whiting and Kendra Gillespie on signing with BYU, but continues to roll on. Recruiting never stops. In the transfer portal, it continues to roll on, and we'll have plenty more coverage for you guys as we track all this. Any other news that breaks between now and Thursday, technically, because this is going to be, I guess, counting for our Wednesday show. We'll have plenty more for you guys at that point. But hey, if it comes out fast and heavy, we'll make sure that we have it covered for you guys, as we always do right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast. So once again, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you, once again, who are everydayers with us here. And of course, we'll talk to you guys again soon, right here on Locked On Cougars.